Hi, everyone. It's Harris Rosen again. I'm the co-founder of CareerPathIntelligence.com. And what an interesting evening, at least in Toronto, late afternoon in California, where I am, and morning in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. I'm with Gary Diamond, who is an international education consultant. And you can read his bio on our website. He spends a significant amount of time outside of Canada advising international schools. And he has a background with the Ministry of Education in Ontario, Canada. You can find Gary's biography on our site. And I can regale that I have fond memories of traveling around, albeit briefly, Ulaanbaatar with Gary Diamond about a decade ago, right, Gary? About a decade ago. It's a country facing many challenges. It's a small country, it's landlocked, and but challenges also present some opportunity, as we're about to hear. And so Gary's going to jump into these questions with Tungalag. Now, Tungalag Chimid, or Tunga as she likes to be called, is an expert in vocational education in Mongolia. She has a Master's of Management Science, and she's going to talk about what careers are needed to make her country a better place. After all, this is our mandate is purpose-driven guidance, and very interesting to see what's going on well outside of North America and what sustainable development means in that part of the world. So welcome, Tunga, and welcome, Gary. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Harris. Before I turn the next part of the program over to Tunga, I thought I would make a few comments, put into context of this presentation. As you have quite rightly indicated, Mongolia is probably not on the tip of the tongue of many people outside of Mongolia, let alone outside of Asia. It's a very interesting country, one that I have visited more than 50 times in the last 10 or 12 years. But what's fascinating about this country is that up until 1991, when it was under the Soviet domination of the Soviet Union, it really didn't have much of, if any, autonomy. But with the breakdown of communism and the wall in 1991, Mongolia found itself, as did many other countries in Eastern Europe, completely on its own. I can recall the very first time I went there shortly afterwards, you could just see remnants of the old Soviet-style apartment buildings in the middle of being constructed. The Russians basically pulled out of the country overnight. And for the first 5 to 6 years, Mongolia was really in Never Land. It didn't know where it was going to be. But it has evolved into a very stable parliamentary democracy. And that's one of the characteristics that makes it a very interesting place. Prior to this presentation, Tunga and I were just talking about the fact that the parliamentary elections are going to be taking place later this month, and that will present some other challenges to it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the political perspective or the political conditions of the country, other than to say that one of the things what makes it so fascinating is the emphasis on education. Every person I have met there is highly educated, and if they are not highly educated, they are quite motivated to pursue higher education. And I think Tunga will possibly touch on that very shortly. Anyone I met, store clerks, hotel clerks, taxi drivers, if we had a conversation, it was, oh yes, I will be going abroad to study, abroad meaning to an English-speaking university in either the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom. And there are some very, very significant Mongolian communities now, both in the United States, the Great Britain, and some in Canada as well. The University of British Columbia, for example, has a Mongolian studies program, and they're quite involved in monitoring what goes on in that country. As you mentioned, Harris, Mongolia is sandwiched between Russia and China, two superpowers. And their history has kind of made them very, in my view, somewhat schizophrenic, in that sometimes you meet people and they're quite anxious to study in Russia, but not too many Mongolians I have met are anxious to study in China. The fact that Tunga has higher education and some of her colleagues from Russia, I think, is an indicator that Russia seems to be the place where people of that generation have pursued their higher education. I've often said that Mongolia and Canada share some very interesting things. We both live next door to a very large superpower. In Mongolia's case, it's China. In Canada, it's the United States. And there's a little bit of maybe fear or uncertainty or jealousy of what goes on beyond that border. But the other thing that we share is, of course, our weather. Mongolia is known notoriously as the coldest capital, Ulaanbaatar is the coldest capital city in the world. Interestingly enough, Ottawa would rank second or third. So we do have a lot of commonalities in terms of how we deal with our climate. Canada has, in fact, provided Mongolia with cold weather technology over the years. And one of the main industries in Mongolia is mining. Mining is very key. And there are approximately over 20 Canadian mining companies right now in joint ventures in Mongolia. And anytime a Canadian goes to Mongolia, the assumption there is, oh, you must be here for mining, because Canadians are known in Mongolia for mining. But that's not to say that mining is the only industry. Cashmere, vodka are two products that I think are world-class. And the people themselves are world-class. The culture is fascinating. And with that, I'm not going to spend much more time on that, other than to say that international education in Mongolia is quite unique. When I started going there in the early turn of the century, very few people spoke English. Today, almost everybody I have encountered there can speak English fluently. I remember one day I was standing outside the State Department store, and there was a sale on how to speak English, and the lineup outside the department store was 2 blocks long. Everyone wanted to learn English. Mongolia is very pro-Western. What is another little known fact is the fact that when the US invaded Iraq many years ago, Mongolia sent 137 troops towards that military venture. And I believe the Americans still have training bases on the outskirts of the city. And speaking of the city, Ulaanbaatar has a population of what, 2.1 million Tunga?
1.2 million.
Which is how many, what percentage of the entire population of the country?
Almost 3 of 1.
Okay. So once you leave the city of Ulaanbaatar, you're into the Wild West. I mean, it's quite open spaces, very, very sparsely populated. In fact, one interesting statistic I came across years ago was that the population of the country is what, 2.8 million? and the population of sheep in the country is like 25 or 30 million, which accounts for the very popular industry of cashmere in that country. But we're not here to talk about industry. We're here to talk about careers, technical and vocational training. Tunga has vast experience in working in that field. She has worked with the Asian Development Bank on a number of technical and vocational training projects. We call them TVET, and I think you do too, Tunga. So with that, I'm going to turn this part of the program over to you, and I certainly look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Gary. So thank you for the very nice introduction of Mongolia, and also thank you for the team, especially Harry, so inviting me to do this presentation. This is the first time for me for experiencing an online presentation, but I am very happy to present to you and trying to be very open for you and introduce about the Mongolian Tibet, especially in careers in Tibet. So you can see the brief introduction about the Mongolia. So we have the 3.2 million people in a small country, as Gary said. So median age of population is 29 years. So it means that we are the country of youth. So population is now increasing rapidly. So with birth rate is still going upper. So you can see the life expectancy and also the literacy rate. There is some statistic about Mongolia. So I will be focusing on the labor force participation and the employment rate to pay your attention on this. So working age population is 2.2 million, but active working population is 1.3 million. So, but for the education, so we have the 120,000 students for the higher education, for 40,000 students for Tibet, and 540,000 students in secondary and preschool. We have the 260,000 students. It means that around 1 million students and young people are studying in higher Tibet and secondary preschool in Mongolia. The information about the students and graduates and also the employers. So what satisfaction survey means the information about the in-demand jobs in organizations, industry internship, and also the information about the graduates of Tibet. So general information of the graduates. So we have now 40,000 students studying in Tibet now, and around 20,000 students graduating every year. But the portion of this sex ratio of the graduates is dominating the male students, as you see. And employment satisfaction survey shows us how the Tibet institution is providing and how much the labor market demand skills. And most of the unsatisfied skill is the basic general competencies, and it means the oral communication, writing skills, ability to solve the problem. This kind of soft skills are still not satisfied employees. And there are also the adaptive skills. It means the ability to learn the new skills at the job places. It is still the one of the missing and unsatisfied with the employers. And teamwork it is one of the very important skills of the soft skills, but unfortunately for us, especially for TVET graduates, the employers are very unsatisfied about this kind of skills of our graduates. And also the technical and occupational skills is not so bad, but still we need to consider how to achieve the highest skill for our graduates. And employers, by posting the information about the sources, so as I before previously mentioned, so most of the TVET graduates getting information about the job places through the family, friends, and relatives, or for other ways. But job applicants who visit the company search that the available jobs are still not so big, high percent. But we still have some kind of the job fair, some kind of the PR activities to connect labor market and graduates, but still it's not so well working, and graduates are looking for a job and could not find the proper job for them. This is one of the problem for us still. And salary is the big issue for our graduates, and one of the big reasons why they are not staying for the job permanently, because of their low salary. Everybody wants to change or to study for future upgrading skills, or in order to have the higher level of engineering or technician level. The salary will be more higher. That is why our graduates, normally 20% of the graduates directly go to the upper skills universities, but also the 30% of these graduates planning to have by bachelor or engineering degree within upcoming 1 year. It shows the problem. We should have to consider the salary of the graduates, the salary for the workers to study for future upgrading skills, or in order to have the higher level of engineering or technician level. The salary will be more higher. That is why our graduates, normally 20% of the graduates directly go to the upper skills universities, but also the 30% of these graduates planning to have by bachelor or engineering degree within upcoming 1 year. It shows the problem. We should have to consider the salary of the graduates, the salary for the workers. And of course the conclusion, so you can see the conclusions. There are a lot of conclusions and recommendation about this research. So one of the way to strengthening partnership with institutions and enterprises is the SDGs and SSS, because we would like to know what the needs of the labor market and what the employees want to have, what kind of skill are needed. This is one of the way to directly connect with labor market and TVET institutions. So almost end of my introduction brief. If you have any questions, so I'm ready.
That's great. Let me just start my video. Thank you, Tonga. That was very interesting. And one of the bright lights, one of the attendees, and I'm actually going to do something I don't typically do. I'm going to tell you who it is, because I have such enormous respect for this individual. But my friend Christine Williams, who was a vice president, a regional vice president at a major chartered bank for many years, asked a great question while you were speaking through your slides. She asks, how are women encouraged to work in the mining industry? Mm-hmm. And before you answer, it strikes me that unless I've misunderstood you, that far fewer women are graduating than men. And so maybe you can tackle both of those questions, you and or Gary. So Tunga, what do you think?
So the Mongolia is now, the mining sector in Mongolia is now blooming. So but for the Tibet relevance, so we have only the 20% of the total students are studying in mining sector only, because for the mining sector they have the high technology and needed more higher skilled workers, and big mining companies have their own training centers, and they are getting the engineers on the technician level, skilled workers for the recruitment, but not all the Tibet students. So Tibet graduates applying for the mining sector, for the big mining companies, they need to retrain once again after the graduation.
I'm going to just jump
in to the mining sector.
Gary, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I think that Tunga had said several interesting things. Interesting question. I have found, and I'd like to get Tunga's reaction, as a visitor who doesn't spend a great deal of time there, I come and go, I've always been fascinated, Tunga, by the fact that many responsible jobs the vast majority of responsible jobs in Mongolia are held by women, not by men. And in terms of the mining sector, as you quite rightly point out, it's a higher level of skill, so that it doesn't show up in TVET studies. But as Tunga has said, many of the mining companies are foreign companies. They bring in their own personnel. It would be interesting to compare the statistics of number of people, females in mining engineering outside of Mongolia, because it's a field that, in my limited experience, does not normally attract many females. I'm talking mining engineering specifically.
20,000 international students, something like that, in studying in Mongolia a year. Is that figure correct?
I think so. Yeah.
Right, and so where are they coming from mainly?
Mainly from Russia, from China.
Russia and China.
Yes, neighbor countries. And we have a few numbers from Japan and Korea also, mainly from Asian countries.
Right, okay, and that makes sense given your proximity to those countries. And another interesting question came in about the role of the Asian Development Bank, and I've been involved in an RFP process involving the Asian Development Bank. But maybe you can briefly tell us, what's the role of the Asian Development Bank, and has this been helpful or supportive, and if so, how?
Mm-hmm. So Asian Development Bank is one of the big sponsors in Tibet, and also the education sector, as I know. So mm-hmm. they are implementing the two big projects now in higher education sector and Tibet sector. This is not the grant. This is some kind of the loan for us from ADB in order to upgrade the employability of the Tibet graduates and higher education graduates.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. And because Career Path Intelligence is dedicated to purpose-driven careers. And we're trying to find out what's going on all over the world. And this certainly is, even though I've been to Mongolia, it's always enlightening for me, you know, to talk to people on the ground like yourself and really understand, or Gary, and really understand what's going on there. But here's an interesting question. You know, the entire world, there's this green movement, right? I mean, everyone is trying to go green. You know, the mining industry poses its own challenges, right, to that end, although it is, it's an important industry, right, in Mongolia, obviously. In the same way that, you know, if you look at a country like the Falkland Islands, you know, which came out of nowhere with a small population and with its burgeoning, you know, fishing industry, right? So, look, I'm vegan. I don't necessarily like that it's the fishing industry per se, but is Mongolia, are there initiatives to focus on, you know, going green? I mean, you obviously have more limited resources to do that, but tell us a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. So the green education and greening is the one of the new concept for us, not only for Tibet, and generally for the education system. So the new concept for us, but we are trying to have the green education or green Tibet in Mongolia. And last year we had the national conference on Tibet, and inviting the UNESCO experts and also some of the UNIWOP centers experts to present us the ideas, the greening and the green Tibet, and also now we are starting to talk about the green skills.
Just to clarify, you know, we've been using the acronym TVET, right? So does TVET apply? You know, I know that has a specific connotation in Mongolia, but does it apply specifically to the vocational training sector? And maybe you can explain that acronym a little bit more.
Technical Vocational Education Training. It's an acronym that's popular. I think it's, in my experience, Tunga may have a different perception. It's a term that's really quite popular in the Asian Development Bank circles. They fund, my first experience in coming across the concept of TVET is when I did a couple of projects for the Asian Development Bank in the education sector. It's interesting that if you're looking at Asia and education and funding of international education initiatives, the vast majority are in the area of technical and vocational training.
If you have a country of, what is it, 3 million people, Tonga, something like 2.8 million. So if you have a country of 3 million people, and what's the, forgive me, and it may have been in your materials, you know, the demographics of your country. I mean, Canada has a problem. The United States has a problem. Our problem is that we have an aging workforce. I think I heard you say that you have a younger workforce. Did I get that right, Gary?
Yeah, for sure. It's a very young country.
Right. So is there an opportunity, you know, in Ulaanbaatar and in Mongolia, you know, more broadly, you know, to really beef up vocational training initiatives, you know, and train young people, and not only within the country, but to export those initiatives, because it seems to me that you have a much cheaper labor force, right? And Gary, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you spoke, I kind of thought back to a few years ago when a very well-known community college in Ontario wanted to enter into a joint venture with a technical and vocational training institute in Mongolia. And years ago, that was funded by CETA, but that's no longer the case. think those kinds of initiatives are, I think, very significant and should continue and should expand. I don't know, Tunga, maybe you have.
Of all of us, right? So, if the price of education, of higher ed, is becoming that much more commoditized, right? Then maybe this presents some opportunities for Canadian and U.S. institutions to come in. Would you agree with that, Tunga?
Yes.
That's great. Gary, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's certainly the wave of the future, and it's an initiative that institutions, higher education institutions, particularly in the area of vocational training, should embrace and just run with it as much as they can. There are some significant challenges involved. I'm reminded of what happened. This wasn't technical and vocational trainings per se, but the mining sector. I know that Mongolia has a very interesting history of being very suspicious of foreign companies coming in, mining companies in particular. You used the word exploit, Harris, which was a very, very interesting word to use, because I think there was a perception, there still may be, Tunga, in Mongolia, that foreigners come to Mongolia with ulterior motives, and there's a whole question of foreign taxation and what foreign investment is allowed to do in the mining sector, and this might be carry over to the technical and vocational training as well. I don't know.
Yeah, and Gary, like, a great discussion, and with the advent of not even the advent, that's the wrong word to use, but the proliferation of what was already on fire here, distance learning, and just a less expensive way, to train people, although not always the most appropriate when it comes to hands-on skills, right? But if you can get individuals in this milieu, effectively trained and export those talents. My word was quite deliberate, because I do believe that that there is far too much exploitation going on from the little I know, both within the mining sector and elsewhere. And so there may be some real opportunities here. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Really fascinating discussion. There was one more question that I wanted to get to, and that was the question that seems to be coming up every week, and that is, how has COVID affected higher education institutions in Ulaanbaatar? And you want to take a stab at that, Tunga?
Yes. So the COVID is the biggest problem for the world, and for Mongolia, we don't have the cases in Mongolia, but there are around 180 cases brought from abroad. But we are closed the schools since January of this year. It means almost a half year we're closing the schools and kindergarten till now. But for the higher education and secondary education schools, the TV and online courses allowed for the students. Unfortunately, for Tibet, it's the problem for us, because the 60 to 70% of the content of Tibet based on the practical skills.
Right.
And yes, even though we have some kind of online and e-learning training for our students, but the practical skills is one of the big challenges for us. We could not prefer for our students.
Well, that makes total sense. I mean, training someone, whether it's mining or frankly to become a massage therapist, here in the West. I mean, I have clients in that space. and with professional governing bodies, and how can you effectively train people of all, across a myriad of different vocations where you clearly require, hands-on training. So we could go on for a long time, but I have to wrap up. I want to thank both you, Gary, and you, Tunga. Tunga, for waking up so early in the morning in Ulaanbaatar. Are you in UB? You're right in UB? Okay, so I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And next month, we're going to have some incredible speakers. We're going to have Chip Conley, Jay Levin, a vegan investor from Lugano, Switzerland, who also runs one of the largest biodynamic wineries in the world. So follow us on LinkedIn, like us, give us feedback, good or bad, and mostly stay safe, everyone. Thanks again for coming on this morning, Tunga, and this evening, Gary.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Tunga, be well. Give my regards to all our friends in Mongolia. And good luck in the election.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and contacting me. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
And bye-bye.